He called her worthless in court, but what she revealed silenced everyone. The courtroom was quiet. Not peaceful quiet. Not respectful quiet. It was the kind of silence that presses against your chest. The kind that makes every breath feel louder than it should be. The kind of silence where judgment has already been made, long before the truth has a chance to speak. Emily Carter sat perfectly still. Her hands rested neatly in her lap. Her posture was straight. Her face calm, almost unreadable. To anyone watching, she looked small, passive, insignificant, and that was exactly what everyone in the room believed she was. Across from her stood her husband, Mark Carter, confident, composed, certain, a man who had spent years building not just a business, but a version of reality that always placed him at the center of it. She has never contributed anything meaningful to this marriage. His voice cut through the silence cleanly. No hesitation, no doubt, no emotion, just certainty. Emily didn't move. She doesn't work. She doesn't earn. Everything we have. Everything comes from me. There it was. Simple, convincing, comfortably familiar. The kind of story people don't question because they've heard it so many times before. A man builds. A woman depends. And when a story feels familiar enough, it starts to feel like truth. A quiet murmur moved through the courtroom. Not loud, but enough. Enough to confirm that people were already forming opinions. Already deciding who Emily was. And more importantly, who she wasn't. Still, she didn't react. Not when Mark's lawyer stepped forward confidently. "My client has been the sole provider for this household," he said smoothly. Meanwhile, Mrs. Carter has failed to demonstrate any professional or financial contribution. Failed. The word landed softly, but it carried weight. Failure is easy to believe when it aligns with expectation. Emily lowered her eyes slightly, just enough, just subtle enough to appear defeated. But that wasn't weakness. That was strategy. Because underestimation is one of the most powerful positions a person can hold. Have you ever sat in a room where someone described you so incorrectly it almost felt unreal? Like they were talking about a stranger, but using your name? Emily had, for years, and Mark had perfected that version of her. She spends her days at home, he continued. No ambition. No direction, no responsibility. 2-5. Each sentence sharper than the last. Each word carefully chosen, rehearsed. That was the detail most people would miss. This wasn't emotion. It wasn't frustration. It was preparation. A narrative built over time. And narratives can be dismantled, but only by someone who understands how they were constructed. "I built everything from nothing," Mark added. The hero story. Self-made. Independent. Strong. A man who carried everything alone. Emily almost smiled. Almost because the truth wasn't just different. It was the complete opposite. The judge finally turned toward her. "Mrs. Carter," he said, his voice steady. "Would you like to respond?" The room shifted. Slightly. Subtly, but enough. This was the moment, not where truth begins, but where control changes hands. Emily lifted her head. Slowly, no sudden movements, no visible emotion, just intention. Yes, one word, quiet, controlled, but powerful enough to change the atmosphere instantly. "I would like to ask my husband a question first. With cause. That no one expected. Not the lawyer, not the judge, and definitely not Mark." A flicker crossed his face. Small, but real. Uncertainty. The judge paused, then nodded. "You may proceed." Emily turned slightly toward Mark. Not fully, not confrontational, just enough to acknowledge him. Because this wasn't about fighting. This was about revealing. "Mark," she said calmly, "do you remember the expansion deal your company secured 3 years ago?" He frowned immediately. That has nothing to do with this. Quick, dismissive, automatic, a habit formed over years. It has everything to do with this, she replied. The room shifted again, more noticeably this time, because uncertainty makes people pay attention. That deal, Emily continued, saved your company. Mark's jaw tightened. Of course it did. Everyone knew that deal. It was the turning point of his success. I negotiated that deal, he said firmly. Confidence returned, but thinner now, less stable. Emily shook her head slightly. No, she said softly. You signed it. Silence. Not empty. Heavy. Dense. The kind that forces people to listen. Mark let out a short laugh, but it wasn't relaxed. It was defensive. You're confused. Maybe. Or maybe he had simply believed a story that had never been true. Emily reached into her bag. Slowly, deliberately, every movement controlled. Then she placed a document on the table, then another, and another. Paper doesn't argue. It doesn't raise its voice. It simply exists and demands to be acknowledged. What is this? His lawyer asked, stepping forward. Evidence, Emily replied. Mark didn't touch the documents immediately. That hesitation mattered, because recognition often comes before acceptance. For 5 years, Emily said, I have been working under a consulting identity. A murmur spread across the room. Confused, curious, uneasy. I built connections, negotiated contracts, managed financial risk. Then she looked at him, directly, for the first time. You were never doing this alone. The words landed slowly, like something sinking deeper than sound. That's not possible, Mark said. But his voice had changed. Less certain, more reactive. It is, she replied calmly, and it's documented. The judge leaned forward. Now he was fully engaged. Mr. Carter, he said, were you aware of any of this? Mark didn't answer. Because answering meant admitting something he wasn't ready to face, that he had never truly understood the person sitting across from him. Emily continued. Do you remember the year your company nearly collapsed? His eyes shifted. He remembered. No one forgets the moment they almost lose everything. The investor who stepped in, she said. A pause. That was me. The courtroom froze. Not the same silence as before. This one was different, heavier, real. You told everyone it was luck, Emily added. It wasn't. Now people were recalculating, rewriting everything they thought they understood. And that's always uncomfortable, because it forces people to question themselves. You said I do nothing, Emily continued. So let's be accurate. She leaned forward slightly. Not aggressive, just precise. I built the foundation you're standing on. Mark finally grabbed the documents. His hands weren't steady anymore. He flipped through them, page by page. And with each page, his expression changed. Confusion, recognition, disbelief, and finally, fear. This isn't real, he said, but he didn't sound convinced. It is, Emily replied. You just never asked. The judge spoke again. Mrs. Carter, why was this never disclosed? A fair question. Emily nodded slightly. Because he didn't need the truth, she said calmly. He needed control. Silence. This time, unavoidable. The kind that forces people to think. Really think. What followed wasn't dramatic. No shouting. No chaos. Just process. Verification. Confirmation. Every piece of evidence aligning. Every assumption collapsing. Until there was nothing left. No story. No illusion. No control. Only truth. The decision came. Clear. Final. Unquestionable. But that wasn't the moment that mattered most. The moment that mattered was what came after. Mark looked at her. Really looked at her. For the first time in years. I didn't know, he said quietly. And for the first time, Emily believed him. That was the problem. She paused, then answered, You didn't try to know. That was the difference. Emily stood up, calmly, collected her documents, placed them back into her bag. Every movement deliberate, complete. She walked past him, no hesitation, no anger, because there was nothing left to say. At the door, she paused, not for him, for herself. Because moments like this don't define who you are. They define what you refuse to accept anymore. She turned slightly, just enough for her voice to reach him. You said I was worthless. A pause. Now you understand the difference between being unseen and being unimportant. She didn't wait for a response. She didn't need one. She walked out of the courtroom. And this time, no one looked past her. No one underestimated her. No one misunderstood her. Because now, they finally saw her. And more importantly, she saw herself clear, unapologetic, free.